You going back in?
There's still men out there. God damn. When I go home, people ask me, "Hey, Hoot, why do you do it, man? Why? Just some kind of war junkie?" I won't say a goddamn word. Why? They won't understand. They won't understand why we do it. They won't understand it's about the men next to you. And that's it. That's all it is.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
I want to make it clear that the views expressed by our hosts are not considered the official stance of MBR Views. Remember, this is all about having fun and enjoying the ride.
Good knowing exactly where to go with the football.
All right, welcome back in, everyone, to Inside the Hoosier Mind, hosted by Military Broadcast Radio, MBR, giving a voice to veterans, helping teach them not only how to use podcasting equipment, but helps get them podcasting equipment and helps them to get their voice heard. If you'd like to learn more about it, please hit that little QR code right down there. That'll help actually scan to give you more information about Military Broadcast Radio, what their mission is, what they do, and if you would potentially like to, you could donate to them as well. I do have a very special guest today. He has actually been on the show before, but not on this network in particular. He is here to talk some college football with us because he is a South Carolina Gamecocks fan. He knows quite a bit about the SEC, just like I do, and he and I are both excited for this upcoming college football season, as well as the two new members coming into the SEC, the Texas Longhorns and the Oklahoma Sooners. So, without further ado, let me introduce our interview of the week, Jackson.
Interview of the week sponsored by LTD Tactical.
All right, Jackson, welcome in, buddy. Good to have you back on the show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah, of course, man. Appreciate you coming on. So I'm gonna be honest, man, it's July as of Monday. We had the two new teams join the SEC. We also had technically one new team join the ACC because all of the Pac-12 teams haven't officially joined their new conference yet because their media rights deal is weird and it doesn't technically expire until August 1st, but realistically, everybody joined their new conference as of July 1st, realistically. But nonetheless, though, wanted to bring you in since you're also a big college football fanatic like I am and wanted to get your thoughts just initially before we dive in as far as going into the schedules, who we think is going to have the most success. What do you think about Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC? Was it the right move?
Well, I definitely think it was the right move for all parties. I think it adds some huge brands, and unlike some of the other teams that got added into the SEC in the past, these are two teams that have had pretty recent success, and I think it's a good move for all parties, especially Texas with the team they have.
You mean you weren't excited for Texas and A&M and Mizzou joining, back in 2012?
It didn't really do as much for me as these two teams do.
I mean, at least Mizzou has actually been pretty competitive. I mean, they've been really close to like an SEC championship. I think they went their very first year in the SEC. And I mean, they've at least the first year and recently they've been competitive. Other than that, yeah, they've just been kind of the more people to just get beat up on as far as the bottom
Right.
of the SEC goes. So I got you. I say I'm kind of excited for it. As far as some of the other moves, are you excited about anybody else joining a new conference? I think the Big 12 is kind of interesting. I mean, realistically, I just have kind of Utah running through there because really everybody's kind
Yeah.
of the same in that conference. I think the Big 10 is interesting because honestly, I feel like right now it's going to be Ohio State versus Oregon for the Big 10 overall.
100%. I think Oregon's set up really nicely. They have a pretty solid schedule to make a really good run. Probably Big Ten championship in the first year.
I think so. And I think what helps them too, they have the most experienced quarterback right now coming into basically the powerhouses of the Big Ten. You know, Michigan, I think, is going to take a step back because they've lost so many players to the draft. You've got Ohio State. Honestly, if Ohio State can at least get the quarterback situation figured out, and I maybe think they will with Will Howard, but there's a lot of reports at least coming out of the spring game. They're kind of in the same situation they were last year with Devin Brown and Kyle McCord. Will Howard's not really making them turn any more heads than Devin Brown still is. So it'll be interesting to see how they do. I even heard reports that they may even have, I think Julian Sayin is his name, or Aaron Nolan. The freshman might even potentially get some reps in, especially kind of in the early games where they're, you know, beating up cupcake schedules. So he might be able to get some meaningful snaps, and who knows, he might be able to take over. And we might be talking about a totally different Ohio State down the road.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely possible. I mean, you got 5-star quarterbacks just waiting for their opportunity. I think Will Howard will probably be good enough. I mean, I don't think he'll light up any of the scouts for the NFL, but they have a stacked roster outside of Will Howard. I think he'll be plenty good to get to that Big Ten championship. Yeah, and hopefully for them beat Michigan finally.
Oh, I think they will. I think this, even though a lot of Michigan fans are going to disagree with me and have disagreed with me, I even had one Michigan fan tell me that they were going to go undefeated again. I'm like, buddy, you face Texas, you faced Oregon, and you face Ohio State, all three in the same season. Like, buddy, you are not walking out of that undefeated. There ain't no way,
no chance.
But let's get into it though, at least with Texas as far as the SEC goes. So I'm going to pull up their schedule. And so looking at it right off the bat, because I looked at theirs and I looked at Oklahoma's. Honestly, I feel like Texas kind of gets in that weird spot right there in the middle because they face Oklahoma itself and then they face Georgia. But realistically, first impression, they have a pretty easy schedule right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I think the SEC definitely gave them definitely easier than Oklahoma, and they gave them a kind of a cakewalk, especially, you know, once you get past Georgia. I mean, I don't see much contention after that.
No. So let's go through each game. So they start off, they face Colorado State. That's a pretty easy Texas win to start.
Yep.
Technically, their next biggest challenge, you know, at least early on, is going to be they have to go to Ann Arbor to face Michigan. But I think you and I are in pretty close agreement that, you know, Michigan has a big question mark at quarterback. I think everywhere else they have enough pieces and enough depth they can fill in pretty well. You know, they still have Donovan Edwards, so he'll replace Blake Corum as far as the number one running back option goes. Now, they did lose Roman Wilson, but they primarily used him in the slot, though. Slot guys are pretty easy to replace, and they've had a top offensive line for the past 3 years in college football. So I'm not necessarily super worried about that, but for them, the biggest question mark is at quarterback, and I think Texas has them basically beat in just about every other position. What are your thoughts on it?
I completely agree. I mean, Michigan's a fine team. Like, top to bottom, they have a pretty solid roster, but you're losing your head coach and your defensive coordinator, and your first real test is against maybe the best team in the country outside of Georgia.
Like I say, there's a lot of rankings, and I've seen it at varying degrees. Basically, the top 4 teams that everybody has in college football right now, and pretty much you could put these in any order you want to: Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, and Oregon as the top 4 teams in the country right now. I do agree. Now, I will say, and I want your thoughts on it, because Sharon Moore stayed there as the offensive coordinator, and honestly, he coached them for over half the season last year anyway, because of
Right.
Harbaugh being suspended, having to be away, whatever the case may be. He basically helped coach the team, and they still managed to go undefeated. Do you think that maybe makes a little bit of a difference then? Because, I mean, continuity-wise, coaching, they still have it, and then they're getting Wink Martindale as a defensive coordinator who's coming from the NFL, and he had been with Michigan previously before, so there's a little bit of continuity kind of still there too.
Yeah, I mean, continuity-wise, it was perfect for them, and they, especially in the day of the transfer portal, being able to keep their core group together mostly, which is great for them. But I don't think it's good. I think this reminds me a lot of that Alabama game early on last year for Texas, where a win here kind of sparks them and sparks that locker room for the rest of the season, and they can go on a really good run.
Yeah. So then we have, so then they face UTSA, University of Texas San Antonio Roadrunners. That's going to be a win. Now it is funny that they face University of Louisiana Monroe in their first year. Now, both of us being pretty avid SEC fans, we know what happens when a pretty hyped SEC team has to face ULM in one of their first seasons, Alabama. Do you think the magic repeats itself and they pull off an upset?
Never say never in college football, but I wouldn't put money on it.
Right. I say I don't either. I just always laugh because that's one of the few blemishes on Nick Saban's coaching record, especially going to Alabama, is that he lost to ULM in one of his first years. Then they go on, they face Mississippi State. And surprisingly enough, now that I'm looking at this, the first 4 out of their 5 games are all at home in Texas.
Just noticing that. That's again, SEC, I think, kind of did them some favors with the schedule.
Yeah. And I'm assuming we're both kind of figuring Mississippi State's going to probably take an L for that. I think they ended up actually replacing the coach that actually took over for Mike Leach, if I don't remember right, didn't they?
They did. They fired Zach Arnett, and they hired Jeff Lebby from. He was at Ole Miss, and I think he might have most recently been at Oklahoma. Okay. I might be making that up. He's a good offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
And he's been really good for Ole Miss and I believe Oklahoma. Let me go check that.
Okay. So I mean, honestly, that may be a little bit of a dark horse game then, because honestly, if there's anybody that knows you as well as you know yourself, it's the team that you play every single year and that has one of the biggest rivalries in college football with Oklahoma. So I mean, if he was the OC of Oklahoma and he's at Mississippi State, I'm not saying they're going to, run away with it, but they might keep it a little bit closer than what people probably expect.
And yeah, that was right. He was at Ole Miss with Kiffin, and then most recently he's coming from Oklahoma with Venables as his OC. I think it was a good hire because I think he's a good offensive mind, but I don't think it'll be enough in Arlington. Or do they play in Arlington?
Austin.
Austin, that's right.
Close enough.
Thinking Cowboys.
But then they go on their bye week, and then probably their biggest test is they go to Dallas in the Cotton Bowl Stadium to face Oklahoma for the Red River rivalry. That'll be the first time it'll be played as far as being in the SEC goes. Who do you think comes away with the win on this one? Because Oklahoma now has to have a new quarterback. Brent Venables did get an extension. But I will say his first year in Oklahoma was kind of odd because they started out really hot. They lost a game, and then they just continued to lose from that point moving forward. Now he's lost his senior quarterback in Dylan Gabriel to Oregon. They also lost what is, in my opinion, their best named quarterback in General Booty. He left. So they're going to have kind of an all-new group there. Do you think Texas can still pull out the win over the Sooners?
I do think Texas is in position to win that game, but as far as Oklahoma goes, with Jackson Arnold at the helm at quarterback, he's got a bright future ahead of him. He lit it up in the spring game for them. He's going to be a really good player, but he's not going to beat Quinn Ewers.
I could see that. And Quinn to me, a lot of people kind of hate on Quinn for some reason, and I really don't get why. I feel like other than that first year as a starter, they face Alabama. He gets hurt. Hudson Card comes in. In all honesty, if Hudson Card didn't kind of get banged up too and a couple really weird calls, I think Texas would have beat Alabama both years that they played him, to be 100% honest with you, because they were solid in that game the entire time.
They were, and they were doing way better than anyone thought they were going to do in that first matchup, and unfortunately viewers went down, but they got their get back last year.
Yeah. And then probably to me, the game that is honestly, we could probably flip a coin as to who we think is going to win this game. You've got they do get a break, like you said. They get to host Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think comes away with the win?
I really don't know. Like you said, I mean, you can really flip a coin. I think these are the two best teams in the SEC by a pretty decent margin. Alabama and LSU are gonna have good years, but I think the Texas being at home, they probably are favored.
Mm-hmm.
For what that's worth.
Let me see what ESPN says off the top of their head, or if they even have the bet predictions yet.
Yeah, they might not. Would be interested to see that. But I think I'd probably give the edge to Georgia just because I think Kirby's is going to be on a mission this year.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Kirby, and I will say for somebody who initially I doubted, I actually doubted Carson Beck quite a bit. Just because watching him fill in for Stetson Bennett at one point against TCU is like you couldn't really mess up at that point, you know what I mean? Like if you screw up at this point, buddy, like you probably shouldn't be the starter. But yeah, I think it'll be a Georgia win, to be honest with you. But I also think this will probably be a matchup of the SEC championship too, though, because like you said, it'll be basically the two best teams facing each other. And as of right now, believe it or not, Texas is favored by the line UGA. So Georgia is favored by 1.5 points to win.
That's interesting.
So it's close. I think they're about in the same boat that we are as far as it could honestly go either way.
Yeah.
Then they have to really face their second road game. They have to go to Vandy. I think everybody agrees. Although, believe it or not, Texas's overall record against Vandy is 3-8-1. So I mean,
some South Carolina fans were having fun on Twitter with that just the other day. But their first second road game being, what is that, week 8, 7, 8? Against Vanderbilt is pretty funny,
right?
They were already battle tested by that point, though, with Michigan and Georgia. I don't think they'll fall into any Vanderbilt traps.
No. Then they're lucky they don't have to go to Florida. They get to host Florida. I think they'll easily get the win against Florida. Now, if it was in Florida, I'd probably argue a little bit differently.
I do feel bad for Florida because I don't think they're bad. They were way better than I expected them to be last year. Graham Mertz was like 10 times better than I thought he was going to be.
100%, especially because I watched him in Wisconsin the year before last. I was like, buddy, no. Like the last two quarterbacks they had between Jack Cohn and Graham Mertz, I'm like, y'all are not the guys. Y'all just, you're not that guy, pal. You're just not. Now we do get kind of an old school rivalry after that. Then they have to go to Arkansas to face the Razorbacks. But I think that'll be a pretty easy Texas win. Arkansas, they are taking a step back. They lost Jefferson. He's actually transferred to UCF, so they lost their kind of star starting quarterback. And Arkansas has just been kind of down in the dumps here late.
Yeah, I mean, Sam Pittman started off his tenure there pretty hot, and I thought he could be a guy for Arkansas, but the last couple of years, he's definitely taken a dip. They also lost, hopefully, best running back in the conference with Rocket Sanders.
Right.
Just wait on it, but
right.
I think it should be an easy win for Texas.
Yeah. And then their last home game, they host currently they're number 23 ranked Kentucky. I wouldn't be super worried about that. I mean, Kentucky is so up and down. I don't really see them being a threat in the SEC East at the moment, and I especially don't see them really being a threat towards Texas.
Yeah, I mean, Kentucky is going to be pretty much the same every year. Like, they're going to be good. They're going to be a physical team with a good offensive line. But they're going to have mediocre quarterback play, and it'll be what it is. Kentucky is just kind of Kentucky.
Yeah. And then we get our first Lone Star showdown since 2012, with them going to Kyle Field to take on the Texas A&M Aggies to technically finish off the regular season. I'm gonna be honest, I have Texas winning this primarily because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Texas A&M is always one of those, they start out basically so overhyped, they drop a game, and then it's like once they drop that game, man, they fumble out for like 4 or 5 games, and then for whatever reason, like the last game or so, they're like, okay, we're gonna play our butts off and we're gonna win. It's like, why at that point? You know what I mean? Like, I get it, play for pride, finish off the season strong, but it's like, man, y'all made too many mistakes in the middle, which is what's hurting you.
Yeah, I mean, Texas A&M, I'm interested to see what they do this year without Jimbo, with what's his name coming in from Duke?
Oh, I know exactly.
Elko.
Yeah. Is it
I
weird?
think
He kind of looks like Bill O'Brien a little bit. Like I saw him at first. I'm like, is that Bill O'Brien? Why do they keep putting Bill O'Brien's head coach in
I
Texas
could
A&M?
absolutely see that. But I think they'll be good. But I mean, I don't think it'll be enough to take it against Texas.
Yeah, I don't either. But we'll see for sure. It's one of those. I'm interested to see how Texas will do. But we are going to take a real quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to dive into Oklahoma, how we think Oklahoma is going to do this year in the SEC. It's about as equally hard as maybe a little bit harder, actually. If I look at it. Texas definitely got the short end of the stick on that one. But after this commercial break, we'll be right back to dive into it.
The fact that our patriotism in America is dwindling, I really wanted to start the American AF movement. Freedom is fragile, very fragile. It takes a certain level of intestinal fortitude to stand up and say and do the right thing to preserve the freedoms that so many have paid a large price for. About being in the military, and that recruiter said, it's not Biden's army, it's your army, it's his army, it's his army, it's all of our army.
American tactical. American as
All right, welcome back to Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you in part by Military Broadcast Radio, giving a voice to veterans. And if you like what you're seeing, please like, share, and subscribe to not only myself at Inside the Hoosier Mind, but also scan that little QR code down there underneath Jackson's screen, and that'll give you a little bit more information about MBR. It'll also get you in touch with their social media. There's a lot of other great shows on here to follow and check out. So please hit them up if you're interested in anything else as far as podcasting go. And if you're a veteran and you want to get your own podcast started, scan that QR code and we can get you hooked up and started. But Jackson, we're back, and now we're going to dive into the second team joining the SEC. We're going to dive into Oklahoma's schedule, which, again, for first glance, man, I feel like Oklahoma kind of got the short end of the stick. What's your thoughts on it, man?
I definitely think they got a shorter stick than Texas did, but I think they'll probably be worse overall than they were last year, but they should still have a pretty good year.
Yeah. So they start out honestly with, I would say, 2 easy games. They start out, they face Temple, they face Houston. They get both of those in Oklahoma, luckily. And I think we can both agree those are probably going to be wins. Houston, I feel like took a step back last year, just initially joining the Big 12. I feel like that kind of that momentum and that hype that they had coming from the AAC into the Big 12 kind of died out a little bit, and then they didn't have a bad season, but it was very lackluster. I didn't expect anything to go crazy, but I expected just a little bit better from them last year.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Now, I do think Tulane might be a little bit interesting. I feel like they are one of those teams. They've done a little bit better than what people expected. I mean, heck, in a bowl game that realistically didn't matter, they beat the snot out of USC. So, I mean, that's something. But I mean, Tulane might be a little bit of a quote unquote test for them, but I'm not super worried. Their first real test, though, they have to host Tennessee, which I feel like that's honestly going to be a very underrated game. Because I feel like that's going to be really good. Tennessee, I feel like, has a lot of that hype kind of surrounding them again that they did with Hendon Hooker in the year that they beat Alabama. What do you think? Do you think the hype is kind of there? Or do you think this is one of those? It's going to be a true test for Oklahoma, but do you think they still come away with a win?
I think this is a really interesting game. A couple interesting storylines. Heupel going back to his alma mater at Oklahoma. Interesting just to see how that plays out, what kind of reception he gets. But I think Tennessee is going to have a lot of hype, especially week 4. I don't know what their schedule's like off the top of my head, but I'm sure they'll probably be undefeated or close to undefeated and have enough hype there. And with Nico, I don't know how to say his last name, but he's generating as much hype as any quarterback in the country pretty much right now. With that offense, it should be a fun one.
So just to give you an idea, and I wonder if this changes your opinion a little bit. So Tennessee's first 3 games, they face the Chattanooga Mocs. I'm going to assume that's a L for Chattanooga. Then they face NC State. So they face the Wolfpack, and they face it in Charlotte. So that might be a little bit of a tough game for them. And then they host Kent State before they face Oklahoma.
That NC State game is actually pretty interesting because I think NC State should have a pretty solid year.
Yeah, I felt like they had a pretty good year last year. Honestly,
Yeah.
I feel like they're one of those teams that if Clemson honestly hadn't been good for so many years, and then Florida State kind of also edging them, I feel like NC State would be one of those. They'd be at least a top 3, top 4 team in the ACC right now.
Yeah.
Had they not have to have all that rough competition.
Yeah.
So if you had to take a guess just right now, who do you have winning Oklahoma versus Tennessee?
I'd probably give the edge to Tennessee.
Okay.
2 young 5-star quarterbacks going at it. It'll be fun either way. But I think Tennessee probably has a better all-around roster. But being in Oklahoma is also a big deal.
Yeah. Then they have to travel. They have to go on the road for their first road game. They have to go to Auburn and face the Tigers. Now, albeit Auburn's another one of those. They're very hot and cold. They have really good years. They have really, really bad years. Then they have good years again. I'm going to say Oklahoma wins against Auburn.
I think so too. But you kind of nailed it. You really don't know what to expect with Auburn and with Hugh Freeze. It being at Auburn, obviously helps them.
Yeah.
I think Oklahoma probably takes that, that's a really good start to the month. First month in the SEC is, going 4-1 would be really nice.
Yeah. Then they have their first bye week. Then they come into the Red River rivalry. And I think we both agreed Texas is probably going to walk away with the win on that one. So they're going to be sitting at 4-2. And then they host your team. They host the Gamecocks. Now, I'm going to be honest. I don't know a lot about South Carolina. I know Spencer Rattler got drafted to the Saints, and he was honestly a lot better, I think, for South Carolina than what people probably gave him credit for. I remember watching him at Oklahoma when he was the starter over Caleb. And honestly, I felt like once they started to struggle, they just gave up on him. They had Caleb come in and replace him. He actually ended up, I think, doing a comeback win against Texas to basically secure the starting job. And then Spencer kind of got tossed to the wayside. But at the time, they were projecting him to be one of the top round draft picks in the NFL. Goes to South Carolina. I thought had a pretty good last couple seasons. I mean, they beat the snot out of, I think, Tennessee, and I think they beat Clemson last year too, didn't they?
2 years ago, but yes.
Okay. So what do you have with your Gamecocks having to go into Oklahoma the first year Oklahoma's in the SEC?
I think Oklahoma probably takes that
Yeah.
relatively easily. I think we have it'll be a redshirt freshman starting at quarterback. Obviously, this will be later, mid season, so he'll kind of have his feet under him a little bit. But I don't think our roster matches up particularly well. And Venables has given Carolina nightmares for way too long.
Yeah, that's fair. And now 2 out of the next 3 games are really interesting to me because then they have to go to Ole Miss to take on the Rebels, who I expect Ole Miss to have a really good year this year with Jackson Dart at quarterback. I felt like they had a really good year last year. They did get beat by LSU. They just had a couple games where it's like, man, they were at least in it. They didn't get absolutely steamrolled like they do a lot of times. So I feel like Ole Miss is kind of getting built up to potentially do a pretty decent run. So I think with it not only being in Oxford, but Ole Miss kind of having the continuity with Jackson Dart being there, I think I might have to give Ole Miss the win on this one.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and I'll go ahead and spoil. I think they probably lose at Missouri as well. I think that's a pretty tough 2 or 3 game stretch. I think Ole Miss is poised to have a really solid year. Their defense, what they did in the transfer portal, should be way better than people. Like when you think about Ole Miss, you don't think about a good defense.
Yeah,
I think this year that might change in some people's minds.
Yeah. And luckily they have the Maine Black Bears in between there back in Oklahoma to kind of rebound a little bit if they lose to Ole Miss. And then, I agree. They have to go to Mizzou, an old, Big 12 rival that they have to face. And honestly, Mizzou was in the same boat last year. They had a lot of very close losses. I mean, they beat Ohio State in the bowl game that they played in. I feel like Mizzou is really feeding off a lot of momentum right now. I feel like there's a very positive culture there. They have a lot of their guys coming back too. So I feel like Mizzou might also be one of those teams. They're going to be poised to kind of have a big year in the SEC and be a lot better than people think.
Unfortunately, I agree. I don't like Missouri too much. I don't like drink.
That's fair.
he beat Carolina at App State and then has beaten us every year at Missouri. I got to, whatever. But anyways,
that's fair.
They're going to be good.
Yeah.
And the backing they have for that coaching staff, the NIL money coming in for that coaching staff, I don't see them going away anytime soon.
No. And then unfortunately, Oklahoma really gets the short end of the stick. If they lose 2 out of those 3 games, they go into a bye week, and then they finish off the year. They have to host Alabama, which, let's be realistic, unless Kalen DeBoer has an absolutely abysmal season in his first start, which I'm going to be honest, I do think Alabama is going to take a little bit of a step back. I mean, they already have the last couple of years just because of the whole NIL deal coming in. They haven't had that really good, continuity of quarterbacks that they have. I'm personally not a big fan of Jalen Milroe. Even watching him last year, he got benched during the regular season. Yeah, he came in. He had a pretty decent game against Michigan. There's still a lot of rough edges with him at quarterback. It's like, man, you are trying to kind of run the ball first. You're trying to force it, and it's like he seemed to get a little bit more comfortable, but it's like, man, he's not what I would picture as like the stereotypical Alabama quarterback. Like a lot of these guys are true pocket passers, and he's kind of that mobile hybrid that when I think Alabama, it's like, yeah, I don't see you, man. I'm sorry. Like if you went to any other team, you'd probably be like the absolute star back on their team. But for Alabama, it's like, I don't feel like you really work for that system. And now Kalen might be a little bit different because Kalen got, Michael Penix, and Michael Penix started out as that when he was with IU, and that's what actually caused him to have a lot of injuries. And then Kalen was like, hey, man, we're going to get you a good offensive line, which they did do really well in the transfer portal as far as getting all of Washington's O-line and part of Iowa's O-line in Alabama. So Alabama should have a good offensive line again. So maybe he'll be able to work with him like, hey, man, you don't have to take off and run. You can be more of a pocket passing quarterback. But do you think Alabama, does the tide roll over the Sooners?
I think so. I don't maybe not roll. It might be a little tougher than that, but I do think they probably win. It'd be interesting to see Kalen DeBoer if he can unlock that potential that Jalen Milroe has, because I mean he is a really good athlete.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting. Another thing they haven't had in a while is a star receiver.
Yes.
You look back on some of those really good Alabama teams, they had stacked wide receiver rooms. I don't know if that's getting better. I know they had a really good player sign, but he'll be a freshman. So I do think they'll probably take a step back, generally speaking, but I don't think they will fall to Oklahoma.
Okay. And then to finish off the year, they have to go to my LSU Tigers into Baton Rouge. I'm going to be honest, and I may or may not get some hate for this. I have Oklahoma winning. And I only say that because, don't get me wrong, I watched Garrett Nussmeier in the bowl game against Wisconsin. He played pretty well, but again, it's a bowl game. There's not a lot of starters there. He ended up actually leading them on a comeback victory to win. But you lost Malik Neighbors, you lost Brian Thomas, you lost Jaden Daniels, you lost a lot of key pieces overall. So it's not that I expect LSU to be trash, but kind of in the same boat as Alabama. You're probably going to take a couple steps back of you're going to be good, but I don't think you're going to be that good. And I think depending on, and it may even depend on Oklahoma's momentum, because by then they may be so beat and exhausted. Because I mean, you're facing right now 3 of the top 10 teams. Well, actually 4 of the top 10 teams in the second half of your schedule. With a couple games sprinkled in here and there. I mean, Oklahoma may just be completely defeated at that point, and they're like, "Hey, we don't really have a shot in the SEC championship. We don't have a shot to go in the playoffs." They may rest guys. Who knows? But what do you have as far as them facing the Tigers?
I think they're kind of in a similar spot as LSU. You're losing your really good quarterback. I mean, not Dylan Gabriel wasn't Jaden Daniels, but he was really good.
Right.
And you've got a younger guy who's supposed to be good. He's supposed to come in and not miss a beat, really. So I think you can kind of flip a coin for this. Being in Baton Rouge is a huge home field advantage, as big as any. So maybe that edges LSU a little bit.
Yeah.
But I could definitely see Oklahoma going in and finishing the year strong. So I think you can kind of flip a coin either way.
Yeah. And then we will actually switch real quick. We'll talk about your Gamecocks. And I'll pull up their schedule as far as how you think they're going to do this year. Their schedule's a little rough because
honestly, this it's not even that as bad of a schedule. Usually, top 10 toughest schedules preseason. I think this year ESPN has us at like 17.
Okay, so not terribly bad.
But I guess that's because every SEC team now has the same schedule as we do.
Yeah,
you just have to add in Clemson.
Right.
I don't see too much upside. I think 6-6 is probably like I'd be pretty happy if they go 6-6.
Yeah.
You got to beat Old Dominion, Akron, Vanderbilt, Wofford. So you got those built in, which is always nice. I think Kentucky's probably the biggest game on the schedule. Week 2 at Kentucky, probably you lose that, your chances of going to a bowl look pretty slim.
Yeah, I think counting Kentucky would probably be your guys' 6th game.
Yes.
As far as winning. Yeah, because I would see him beating Old Dominion, Akron, Vandy, Warford, and then Kentucky would probably be that 6th game. It's like, ooh, y'all gotta win that one.
Yeah, that's a big game. It's a lot like the UNC game last year, which looking back was the difference maker. That's a game we probably could have won and made a bowl game if we had. So that's probably the biggest game on the schedule. LSU, I don't see it. Ole Miss, Juice Wells revenge game. I'm sure the fans will be riled up for that, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, at least your benefit though. I mean, a lot of your big games you're hosting. So I mean, you host LSU, you host Ole Miss. Now you do have to go to Alabama and Oklahoma back to back. You do host Texas A&M, and then you host Mizzou. So, I mean, you could maybe have a little bit of a factor in there. I think Texas A&M might be another one of those games that, depending on how Kentucky goes, you guys might be able to come in here and be like, all right, look, we may or may not get our butts kicked from in the 3 games in between our buys, but you're coming off of a bye, so it's like, all right, we can kind of regroup, we can relook at things, and now we can attack Texas A&M.
Yeah, that October stretch is as brutal as it can get, pretty much. I mean, that is bad. That's 3. That might be 3 bad losses, like 3 blowouts.
Yeah.
But A&M, last time they came to Williams-Brice, we got the win there. So, and then Clemson, that's always a rivalry games. You wake up a little different for those.
Yeah.
I see 5-7, 6-6 probably somewhere.
Okay.
Maybe if Lenore Sellers is as good as the staff thinks he can be.
Yeah.
Maybe you go 7-5.
Yeah. And I don't know why I'm blanking on the guy's name, the head coach of Clemson.
Oh, Dabo
Sweeney. It'll be interesting to see how Clemson does this year, because I mean they had a rough year last year. I mean they started out real high ranked. They got blown out by Duke of all colleges to get blown out by in the ACC. They finished out rough, and if I'm reading that right, yeah, they're ranked 19th at the moment, which I can't remember the last time I've seen Clemson ranked that low.
Yeah.
Especially to start out the season, and especially with his mantra of he doesn't want to use the transfer portal. He wants to, have guys that he recruits, which I'll be honest, man, if you're trying to be a long-term college football coach and trying to have the success that you want to have, especially against, Florida State, who's going to be using the transfer portal quite a bit. Miami's going to be using it. Pretty much every team in the ACC is going to be using it. You got to step up, because you're not going to be able to recruit like you used to, especially with the NIL money out there. You've got all these teams that are going to be able to pay a lot more. You look at Ohio State, Texas, Alabama, I think Oregon. I'm trying to remember the top 5 teams as far as like money that they've spent to get recruits, and all of them, but Texas has won a national title as a result of it.
Right.
So,
honestly, I think Dabo, keep doing what you're doing. You don't need the portal. Keep falling behind. Coming back to where Carolina is. Keep doing what you're doing, because it's not working, and I love it.
Right. So you're just wanting to see it so you can see the downfall.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's fair. At least we're going to take one more quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to discuss the ACC if we think they're going to do it good. We'll be right back.
Department of Veterans Affairs. For PSAs on the best services available to veterans, go to VA's new radio outreach page, news.va.gov/outreach/radio.
All right, we are back to Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcast Radio. giving a voice to veterans. If you're a veteran that would like to learn more, potentially start a podcast and let your voice be heard, please scan that little QR code down there underneath Jackson's screen. Or if you just search Military Broadcast Radio, that'll bring up to your website. You can get in touch with us, learn a little bit more and whatnot. But Jackson and I are back to discuss the last topic of the show of the new teams joining the ACC. And I'm going to be honest, man, they're adding 3 teams, but I still don't really think that's going to make a big difference. And it's not really a hot take. I think it's kind of a generally well-known consensus. The next conference that I think is going to fall as far as teams leaving to make more money and is going to cease to exist just like the Pac-12, I think is going to be the ACC, man.
Yeah, I agree with that. Josh Pate for 24/7 Sports actually thinks a change for Florida State could be coming very soon. For what that's worth.
I've seen a few different things. The actual 3 biggest teams making a lot of noise and impact to get out of the ACC, and especially their grant of rights and their media deal, has been Clemson, has been Florida State, as well as UNC.
Yeah.
You would have to probably guess Miami's going to be in there as far as a big brand looking to expand back out, probably look to get back a lot of former glory that they have. It will be interesting, though, because not only do people have to look at this, they look at it primarily from a football perspective, but you have to kind of look at it from a basketball perspective of, whoever gets North Carolina, is Duke a package deal? Because even though they're rivals, it's probably one of the biggest and most, one of the best money-making rivalries in college basketball, at least, with Duke and UNC. If you had to take a guess, because honestly, it's just purely stipulation at this point, where do you think at least Florida State, Clemson, UNC, and Duke all end up if they leave the ACC?
I really don't know. I think Clemson probably would go to the Big Ten, maybe Florida State to the SEC.
Okay.
And then, UNC and Duke could go wherever, whoever appreciates basketball more.
Right.
So maybe the SEC.
I'm going to be honest, man. I actually had your 2 flipped. I had Clemson going to the SEC because I feel like that kind of fits them a little bit more as far as their play style goes. And if you look at a lot of the national championships when it's been the SEC versus a non-SEC team, it's primarily been against Clemson.
Right.
So, they kind of fit the SEC style more. Now, Florida State's, I kind of did a deep dive into of, if you look at the media rights deal, it's exclusively signed with ESPN. And if they do the lawsuit to basically get out of it, they're breaking that deal with ESPN. And the SEC is pretty much only signed to ESPN and ABC.
Yeah.
So I kind of looked at it as maybe Florida State looks at this and goes, well, our really only option that doesn't have an ESPN affiliate after we probably pissed them off of, hey, we want more money from you guys and you're not willing to pay it. So we want to go to the Big Ten because the Big Ten only has Fox, CBS, and NBC. They don't have any ESPN media rights. So I could almost see that. And then, UNC and Duke to me are kind of a toss-up because, football wise, they haven't been bad. I feel like UNC has been a little bit more overhyped. And I only say that because of the whole Drake May thing. I didn't watch a lot of him. What little bit I watched of like some highlights and whatnot, it's like, okay, he was good for the couple years that he truly was a starter and played, but it's one of those I expected more, and I expected a little bit of growth. And honestly, and your quick thoughts on it, I would have liked to see him actually stay one more year at North Carolina now that the playoffs have expanded, because now you have 12 chances to get in. Can you take this team to at least get in the playoffs? Can you get maybe 1 or 2 wins? Not saying you got to do a super deep playoff run, not saying he's got to make the Natty or even win the Natty, but how well can you do with this Carolina team if you're given the chance to even just make the playoffs? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that for sure. It would have been fun to see him stay another year. Obviously, got picked super high, so can't blame him.
Yeah.
But he always seemed like a guy that was more suited for pro ball than college. I don't really know like how to substantiate that, but he was just always a guy that immediately he was like, okay, this is a professional football player.
Right.
And UNC the last couple of years, especially last year, kind of failed to surround him with any sort of real talent.
Yeah.
So just based on that, but I do think it would have been fun to see him and UNC run it back.
Yeah. And I mean, in their defense too, that's kind of hard to do because I mean, you know, with the NIL money, you know, each team kind of earns their own different amounts and whatnot. And
yeah,
UNC, at least recently, has not really been well known as far as, hey, if you come to UNC, you're going to for sure be a pipeline in the NFL. You're going to compete for a national title. You're going to earn a lot of money. So I was like, a lot of people don't really see it. So I kind of get that. But keeping with the ACC, though, they are adding 3 teams. They are adding Stanford, they're adding Cal, and they're adding SMU. Now, I know when I first sent you this topic, you're like, I'm going to have to do research on this. I kind of already have my own thoughts about it as far as if I think any of them are going to do decent. I don't think any of them are in the ACC. I still think it's Clemson's show, it's Florida State's show. Maybe Miami squeezed in there. I know we talked a little bit earlier about North Carolina State. I think they could maybe have a little bit of a say. But other than that, man, I feel like the rest of the ACC is just kind of in the same boat. I don't think Pitt's going to do that well. UNC will probably take a step back now that they don't have Drake May there. I really don't see anything too crazy happening. And I don't see any of these 3 teams, quote unquote, capitalizing on that being the case.
Yeah, I don't think any of them will be championship contenders. I think Stanford will probably be pretty bad. I did do a little bit of reading. I had to familiarize myself with these West Coast teams.
Right.
It seems like Cal's a little bit better suited than Stanford is, but again, nothing crazy. I actually think SMU can have a really solid year. Their schedule is not bad. Their only tough non-conference game is TCU, which will be, that'll probably be tough, but they actually have a pretty nice stretch there where they could make some noise in the ACC, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking at theirs. Yeah, so they have to face Nevada, they face HCU, then they faced BYU. And I'll be honest, there's been a lot of hype around BYU the last couple of years. I've really never understood that. I'm like, I don't get why all the hype with BYU. I do think TCU would be tough. They host Florida State, which that'll be probably really their, second toughest game behind TCU. They have to go to Louisville, then they go to Stanford, they go to Duke, they host Pitt. Yeah, I do agree. I mean, realistically, push comes to shove, they could finish 9-3 by the looks of it, and that's
what I had them at.
And that's with them losing to TCU, Florida State, and Louisville. And it's crazy. They have 3 bye weeks.
Yeah, they could legitimately go 6-2 in their first year in the ACC in conference, and then 9-3 total. That's a really solid year. They're returning their quarterback who has started for multiple years. I think they could make some noise for sure.
Yeah, that's possible, and I didn't even look at their schedule until just now. So I'm like, okay, maybe y'all will make a little bit of a bigger noise than what I thought. So yeah, maybe SMU makes the biggest splash, but I'll be honest, the other 2 I don't really see it just because of what they really what they weren't able to do last year. The Pac-12, it's like, but I will say last year the Pac-12 was probably the best conference as far as overall record, like strength of teams and whatnot. You had USC there for at least the first half of the year. You had Oregon the entire year. You had Washington the entire year.
Had Colorado for 2 games.
Yeah, Colorado for 2 games. Oregon State, a little bit slept on, but Oregon State, Washington State got a couple wins in there. So it was a good conference last year. Real quick, without going too deep, I know we kind of talked about we think Oregon from the Pac-12 is probably going to make the biggest impact as far as the Big Ten goes, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wouldn't argue with that.
I kind of already have my own thoughts as far as how Washington and UCLA are going to do. I think Washington takes a step back. they're replacing their head coach. They're replacing basically all 22 starters that they had on that championship team are gone. So I think they take a little bit of a step back. USC, their biggest replacement they have to replace is Caleb Williams.
For sure.
And did Lincoln Riley finally hire a defensive coordinator that is better than a wet paper bag as far as being his defense being on the field or not?
I do think he did. I do think DeAnton Lynn is actually a pretty good hire for them, but I think they'll be good, but not great. I don't believe in Miller Moss that much. If Caleb Williams can take them over the hump, I don't think Miller Moss will.
Yeah.
Washington's gonna be worse. I mean, they're losing everything.
Yeah.
Including their coaching staff. And then UCLA, I do love that they got Bieniemy. It's an awesome hire, but I don't think they have enough talent.
Yeah.
There to make any noise year one.
Yeah. I do want to point something out that I watched earlier this morning because they had an interview. Actually, no, not this morning. A little bit earlier. Joel Klatt sat down with Matt Rule from Nebraska. And Matt Rule was like, look, if we were as bad as we were last year, he's like, I'm gonna quit. I'm gonna go golf. And I was kind of like, that's a big talk, man.
Statement.
Like you're in the Big Ten, buddy. You got a lot of new additions. But then I looked at their schedule. I'm like, I mean, like y'all could actually do pretty well. Like that's about as good as a schedule as you can get, to be honest with you.
The last three is a pretty tough stretch, but I mean, before that, the only clear loss is Ohio State.
Right. And I'm like, man, y'all, UTEP, Colorado is going to be a big question mark, and you get to host them in Nebraska.
Yeah. I won't believe in Nebraska because they have Marcus Satterfield at offensive coordinator, who was Carolina's offensive coordinator for a couple of years. And he can't draw up a play to save his life.
Okay.
But Dylan Raiola is a dog.
Yes.
And, I mean, that's as big of a recruit as Nebraska's landed since I can remember.
Right.
So, I mean, they're with that schedule, they're poised for a pretty solid year.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, too, as far as the offensive coordinator goes. He said that he actually looked to Kirk Ferentz as far as how to deal with the weather, how to really deal with a Big Ten schedule. Because in Matt Rule's defense, he's never really had that. He was at where Boston College? No, not Boston College.
Baylor.
Baylor. I know he was at Baylor. He's at one other. Oh, Temple. That's right. So I mean, he really never has dealt with like the true Midwest weather. And especially being in Nebraska. So it's like, okay, maybe he does have a little bit of an edge this year, but I thought it was funny. He looked to Kirk Ferentz as far as, hey, how do we go with this? It's like, man, you could not have picked a worse dude then as far as like, all right, how do we do with this? Well, first thing, don't have an offense. Just rely solely on your defense. Don't even worry about the offensive side of the ball. Just worry about.
He might have gotten some really good defensive tips from him, though.
He probably did, to be 100% honest with you, but
hopefully he didn't listen to him how to run an offense.
Right? Just be like, look, Kurt, just tell me the defense. Don't worry about the O's. Don't worry about the O's. Only
I'll
worry
ask
about
somebody
the
else.
X's. Yeah, just worry about the X's. Don't worry about the O's. Man. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm excited. Also, I'm hoping everybody else is excited. We're only, if you pre-ordered it, we're less than 12 days from NCAA 25 being released. If you pre-ordered, you can play on July 16th. I pre-ordered. I'm ready.
Oh, I'm locked in.
Even though I got to go to Ohio to do the Ohio State Fair for an event for like a week, my Xbox is coming with me.
Yeah.
We not stopping there. We are not stopping.
We're set to go on vacation that weekend. I'm bringing my Xbox. We are locked in. I'm scheming. I'm ready to DM some recruits. We're ready.
Who you building your dynasty with to start?
I don't know. If we're going non-power 5 or power 4 now, maybe ECU.
ECU, okay.
How about you?
Again, if we're picking non-power 4, there's so many tough choices, man.
So many.
Part of me wants to do Oregon State just because I feel like, that one of those two teams deserves some love.
That's fair.
I feel like the Bees can do it. I know everybody forgets about it. Like when they did the deep dive, and it's like they're like the Pac-12, and it's just Washington State, Oregon State. I'm like, that's such an insult. Why did y'all do that? Why did y'all do that? Like, just call them independents or something, man. I don't know. But Jackson, buddy, it has been a blast. Appreciate you coming on, man, and helping me out and talking some college football. Hopefully you enjoyed it.
Yes, sir. Been a blast. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it having you on. Again, if you guys like this, please like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on all my social media at Inside the Hoosier Mind. You can also follow me on the Military Broadcast Radio Network. Again, scan that little QR code or just type in Facebook Military Broadcast Radio. There's, I believe, 3 channels for them. So either MBR, MBR2, or MBR3. You'll be able to find our stuff on there. And appreciate everybody coming out. We will see y'all next week with a little bit more sports talk. Hope everybody has a good night, and we will check y'all out later.
That's the show for today, everyone. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with an all-new show. And remember, you can listen to us again and again. The podcast of this radio show is available right after we go off the air tonight, anywhere that you can get your podcast episodes. And thanks for joining us today. I'd like to take a moment to talk about something close to my heart. Military Broadcast Radio is doing incredible work to support our veterans and bring their voices to the world. They rely on your generous donations and your dedicated volunteer hours to make it happen. I encourage you to consider supporting MBR in any way, form that you can. Use this QR code that's attached to the picture, or you can go to our website at mbradio.us. That's Mike Bravo Radio.us.